So questions, we all have questions. Why do some people do the things they do? Why do our family members not communicate with us the way we want them to? These are all important questions and answers that aren't always easy to find. In psychology, we have the scientific method. We understand that there are ways to shape the questions and then figure out ways to sort out what answers might help us address these burning questions in psychology. So why is research so important? Because it helps us to not just speculate, but to come up with components that support the if and the then. You'll remember that a good hypothesis is about shaping a question, kind of considering, I wonder if, and then sorting out if, then what might be the next step in that. So when we think about research in psychology, we're working on how to do a good framework on our studies so that we can have strong findings, so that we can then make good recommendations as a result. So why is this research important? Because we haven't always understood our world accurately. You'll remember that some people thought the world was flat. We now understand that the world is not flat because we've done some exploration into understanding things. We've also thought that odd behavior from people was the result of possession of evil spirits. And we now understand that there are biological factors that play a role into some of those behavioral issues related to mental health concerns. So asking good questions, putting together a good research study helps us to address the core components related to psychology and understanding the mind. So let's understand the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Inductive is that conclusions are drawn from our observations. If we look back at our last chapter, we can see that behavioral approaches were looking at the observations and therefore they came to conclusions, which is different than maybe looking at the psychoanalytic approach, which they came to some conclusions and then tried to figure out if there were observations that would support those conclusions. So the difference is whether you look at things and then come to conclusions or come to a conclusion and then try to understand if that's a good conclusion that's supported by the facts. So recognize that inductive and deductive are both a part of how we approach psychological research. When we approach psychological method, we need to start with that theory. While we think this is what's going on, and then the hypothesis, if that's what's going on, then we should be able to do this and predict an outcome. Hypotheses help us to put together predictions. And when we think about that in terms of psychological research, we're talking about humans or animal behavior. If we do this, then this should be the necessary outcome because that's what gives a hypothesis a predictive value. One of the key components of a hypothesis is that it needs to be falsifiable. When we think about falsifiable, that's that testing component. That's if I do this, then this should be the outcome. What we're looking for is that if we do this and it doesn't explain the outcome, then we've proven it to be falsifiable. If a hypothesis cannot be proven falsifiable, then it wasn't a strong or effective hypothesis. And we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to understand our design of the research more effectively so that we can come up with more rigor, so that we can come up with stronger predictive options related to our research. This is what is a foundation for the kind of research design that we're going to bring so that we can add to the field of psychology.